Is it on? Oh, well, no. Ah, it's okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm not ignoring you and paying attention to my device, which wouldn't be out of the ordinary, would it? I think I'll just talk to my phone the whole time. No, I'm trying to copy and paste the donation link in the Facebook page, so I can't do that seemingly from where I am. But if you're joining us live, let's see. Oh, here I am. Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Okay, there we go. And sending. Okay, excellent. Well, hello again. Good evening. Welcome. Great to be with you. I just love these conversations because on Sunday evenings, Saturday evenings, we get to kind of blend and bring in other teachings that are not normally used during my weekly classes. So today we're going to be looking at we're not going to be looking at A Course in Miracles. That's mostly what I covered during the week. We're going to be looking at yoga for the most part. And what I also want to recognize before we start is that there really is only one true teaching, one sacred teaching, and it takes different cultural forms. What I like about the yoga tradition that we're going to explore tonight is it's been referred to as the science of God realization. Right? That's one of the names that Yogananda gave it, Paramahamsa Yogananda, the royal science of God realization. And what he basically means by that is there is a way that has been preserved for millennia that creates the opportunity for the mind to remember its nature or its true source. Because as we discover from the womb till now, our minds are in a state of self-forgetfulness. And so the science or methodology of remembering the self is really what spirituality and religion is designed to do. That when we begin to get on this path of deeply looking, we enter into a depth psychology. In other words, we begin to really look at ourselves. We examine ourselves. What Yogananda also did, which was very helpful for many Westerners, because he wrote his autobiography of a yogi, which is really one of those classic spiritual teachings or books. Back in the 1930s, I believe it was published, maybe even before that. And one of the things that Yogananda was sure to do was bridge the cultural divide by showing where in the Bible these deeper teachings of yoga had just taken different cultural form. And so when you get on this path of depth psychology, examining yourself, really looking at how the mind works, how you are perceiving, how you are unconsciously distracting yourself away from your source of consciousness, you begin to realize that once you kind of taste that deeper life, you begin to recognize it in other traditions, right? Because oftentimes we go to these traditions having not tasted that experience for ourselves, and then we get caught up in the words and the concepts and the culturally specific images, and then it's my religion. And we become very divided in the way that we think of God, etc. It's like the blind men and the elephant kind of a thing. Everybody thinks they have their hands on reality. But when you really look, it says the Raja is sitting there looking at the blind men fighting amongst themselves because they each have a different hand, a different part of the elephant that they're holding. And they're saying, this is reality. This is what an elephant is. And no, this is what an elephant is. And the Raja, the king, is laughing. And the royal science of God realization in Sanskrit is called Raja Yoga, the yoga of kings, the yoga of the Raj. And so basically in that metaphor, we see that the Raja is sitting on the throne and he's looking at the 5 blind men with their hands on the elephant. And the 5 blind men represent the 5 senses. And the 5 senses can only get a very small slice of reality, and they're misperceiving it as a result of that. So you can never really see reality through your 5 senses. Your five senses don't show you reality. They show you a distortion of reality. The Raja sees beyond the five senses and hence can see the whole of reality and knows it to be what it is. And in fact, because of that, he has a very good nature, or she has a very good nature. Laughter results where there's argument within the positions of ego consciousness and there's dualism and vying for who's right and who's wrong. The Raja is never in that game, is not interested in debate or trying to prove a point. The Raja sees what is there to see and enjoys it and is tickled by the arguments and the debates, but never involved in them. And so we want to look at Patanjali's science of yoga this evening, this Raja Yoga, as he calls it. And it's very interesting because, as you'll see, it has a direct and important part to play in everyone's life, everyone who's ready to find peace. Actually, Patanjali says yoga is the avoidance of future pain. It's a very good definition. Yoga is the avoidance of future pain because when you are acting in a state of self-forgetfulness, when you don't know the source of your own being and the light of your being, you misunderstand everything. You can't really know anything if you don't know yourself. That's why Sri Nisargadatta says that people who really try to change the world and do good without knowing who they are dangerous. So that aside, one of the ways that we actually come to know ourselves is in, as we're going to see, performing deeds of compassion and thinking of others more than ourselves. These are very basic steps because what it's going to do is it's actually going to thin out the attachment to the ego. Right? So these are important steps because, as we're going to see, Patanjali is going to meet us where we are. Who we think we are as the ego can't really get to the ultimate goal of yoga, which is to know that nothing really exists except the oneself, which is the divine. In order to come to that experience, you have to go through this developmental process. And so this is why he'll say, we have to actually begin by clarifying and purifying our mind. And that involves very basic ethics and morals in the beginning. Right? He starts us off in what are called the yamas, these ethical and moral actions. And what it basically means is you can't get enlightened or experience enlightenment without first being a decent person, being a kind person, being a loving person, keeping your word, doing well unto others, having compassion, not harming life. That's the first one he actually mentions. Because if you are saying you want to be enlightened, you want to know God, as it says in the Bible, if you say you love God and hate your brother, you're a hypocrite, and the truth is not in you. And so what we want to recognize is ground zero is be a decent person. Show the qualities of God in what you do, say, and think. Because this is how you begin to set the stage for your right relationship to your enlightened nature. The enlightened nature is like the sun. It's always shining. It's always bestowing grace. It never changes. It's always already this. What is keeping us from it is we don't have our antennas pointed in the right direction, or we have encrusted our antennas with all this selfishness and hatred and fear and anger and distrust. And so we're not picking up the frequency because we are too isolated within ego thinking and creating more and more karma or bad results from wrong behavior, wrong ideas, wrong speech. We kind of guck up the works. And so though the sun of our true self is always shining, We're completely ignorant of it. We are completely missing it, even though it's right here, right now. So Patanjali is saying, get right first by being a decent person in the world. Very important. Speak the truth. Be honest. Don't steal. Don't have any ill will towards any being. Be kind. And that goes for everything in thought, the world of speech, and the world of action. And you'll see that as you begin to implement these ethical principles, they continually deepen and become more and more clarified as you go along. And you'll begin to see that there are other areas that you were blind to, but now, oh, I got to clean up this part of my life too. I'm not being authentic in this relationship. I'm not setting healthy boundaries in this relationship. How am I ever going to dial in a peaceful, calm, and harmonious mind if my interpersonal life is in chaos? I say I want to be happy. I say I want to be enlightened. I say I don't want future pain. But I'm doing everything in my power to make that happen. So very important. How you are relating to others is the first step in the yoga process. Then he says, it's how are you relating to yourself? Check yourself. And so he gives these three important actions to look at. First is, because our antennae are so encrusted and they're not picking up the frequency of the divine self, we have to purify. We have to get the guk and the incrustation off of our antennas, because this is all accumulation of bad thoughts, bad speech, and bad actions over a long period of time. We've really, we need a bath, right? An interior bath. And so we are going to do things like examine ourselves very deeply. That's the second action. So we need to purify. That means we're going to accept the discomfort, right? This is the word he uses, tapas. Accept the discomfort of looking at where you're out of integrity, where you were not your word, where you're abusing yourself in that relationship. Look at how you are actually secretly avoiding waking up. Right? You know better, but you kind of withhold the will from staying present in service or classes, or you're not allowing your time to be scheduled every day where you have your sacred study and your contemplation. Like, look at how that needs to perhaps go up a notch, raise it a level. Right? Because remember, when you begin to have these deeper insights into the nature of your own being, you realize it's within that is happiness. It's within that is safety. It's within that is abundance. So as I begin to really look and see where I need to purify, I begin to instantly start to come up with areas that need fine-tuning. The second inner work that Patanjali mentions is what he calls self-study. And this is really important. This is what we do on a Monday night in A Course in Miracles. You really are looking at how your mind operates. Like really looking at why you do the things you do, why you think the things you think, why you value the things you value, why you believe what you believe. Most of us are robotic and just operating in a very unconscious way. Swadhyaya, or self-study, is when you examine yourself. Right? Just as you would look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and see what needs plucking or changing or shaving, like you're looking at all these different parts of yourself. You do that with your mind. You are always examining your mind. You're looking at your state of mind. And as that Raja was able to look at those 5 blind men in the elephant, you begin to realize that you're actually becoming increasingly identified as the seer and not the seen. You're able now to completely remove yourself from what you're seeing. So you become less reactive, even though more stuff comes up to look at. And it can get really ugly sometimes when the unconscious or subconscious stuff starts to bubble up. What Carl Jung said is you start to do shadow work. You begin to see what's been repressed, ignored, avoided because of its repugnance, or because you don't think you're good enough for it, or because somebody else told you that, that's beyond your capacity to ever, find happiness, or whatever it is that's been pushed down and judged as impossible or abhorrent or taboo. That begins to come up as you begin to deeply examine yourself. So you confront your shadow. But because you're becoming more attuned to the witness, the seer, what's seen is the old stuff that's coming up. And you're able to begin to move beyond it, or have compassion for yourself and let it go, or see why you did what you did, or why others may have done what they did. But it's also done on a collective level, because as you see this world fomenting and throwing up more and more ugliness, you also realize that because you're the one divine self, there's really no division between the individual and the collective. You are the collective as well. We've just become so conditioned and pigeonholed and restricted in our self-identity that we disassociate from the collective and think it's something other, but it's arising in your consciousness. It is you. It is your consciousness. So that's part of the shadow work that Jung recognized. He says you start with the individual shadow work, but eventually you do the collective shadow work. You begin to realize, with the thoughts that you're projecting onto a political leader or law enforcement, so-called, or whatever it may be, if there's any kind of real buy-in to making it real and hating it and projecting this fear or this wish that somebody would really be harmed or hurt because of the injustice that they're doing, that comes up too, and you realize, wow, that actually is a murderous thought. I might feel justified because of the situation in projecting it, but I'm actually projecting murder. And you become aware of that as well. So this is all part of purification. You begin to really see how disgusting and filthy you are. No. No. You begin to see what actually has been in the way of knowing how blessed, beautiful, and joyful you are. Right? So these are all steps along the way. And as a result of this, you realize now you're no longer living for your own personal ego self. You're actually living for the deity or the divinity that's in the very center of you. And this is the third action that Patanjali will say. It's service to God or devotion to God, Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara is your deepest awareness. It's the purity of yourself that is untouched by space or time or karma or reincarnation. This is the deepest part of you. This is where you and the Father are one in the language of Jesus, right? And when you come into touch with this, you realize that life is actually worth living in a way that exceeded your own selfish viewpoint before. Like, there's actually a deeper purpose or meaning to why I am here. And I begin to actually, without the ego getting involved, become more and more of a voice for sanity, a voice for compassion, a voice for joy and happy laughter in the world. But it's unconditional. And when no one else is around and there's nothing going on and, it might even not look good in my personal life, there's this untouched place within me that is always joyful, never affected by what the mind or the body are doing or not doing. That's the beauty of it. And I'm going to choose to live in this sanctuary that is at the center of my heart. Okay? Now, to get there is, like I had said, a process. And so we start out with what Patanjali says is this mind work. And I just want to share a little bit of what he means by that. So it's this working on the mind, and it starts with examination, as we talked about. An examination, as we talked about, is like how you're showing up in the world, how you're showing up in your relationships, how you're experiencing life and what your motivations are. You examine that, what your value system is, what your worldview is. You actually look at what you believe and why you believe it and how you are to others and how others are to you. Are you being mistreated because you have this penchant for self-punishment, or are you taking advantage of people because they're just extras in your movie and you can do whatever you want as long as you can get away with it? So this is all part of the examination, and what Patanjali uses, the word he uses there, is examination has to do with the physical stuff. As you check those boxes and clean up those areas that are everything I just mentioned, you will naturally begin to refine your consciousness. That's why doing good to others, cleaning up your out of integrities, being your word, all of these ethical and moral actions purify your consciousness. They subtleize it. This is why we can't perceive the self, because of these incrustations of our antennae. It's because we have been out of alignment with our integrity, out of alignment with our truth, out of alignment with honesty, not being loving and compassionate. So now that we start to do those things and show up as that, our consciousness begins to pick up a subtler level of reality, of embodied reality. And then this is what he calls vichara. Vichara is insight. You actually begin to be aware of this inner psychological environment or atmosphere. You begin to actually examine and take apart the subtle world of your thoughts, these subtle parts of your senses. Right? One of the examples that he'll use is, right now you're hearing my vocal cords vibrating and my tongue and my teeth are moving and creating these words that are being thrown out there, and they're impacting your eardrum and your sense organ of hearing. And then your mind is making all of these concepts and meanings based on these vibrations and sounds. So that would be part of that first level of examination. As you subtleize, you actually begin to go, okay, so what's this deeper place where I'm hearing? What is hearing? Not the sense organ of the ear and the eardrum and the vibrations within the ear, but what is this deeper level of the inner being, this subtle matter of hearing, seeing, thinking, tasting, touching? There's a subtler dimension to all of this. Right? And that becomes clearer and clearer, this insight. And this is vital. It's so important. This is why people can't make the leap to the non-dual self. Oh, well, you're already awake. You're already enlightened. You're already the Christ. You're already the Buddha. But there's too much crust on the antenna. And oftentimes we can't get there from here. So we have to subtleize. We have to do the basics. And then he says, as this insight grows, you actually begin to feel this inner purity dawning. Like you're cleaning up, you're checking the boxes, you're examining yourself, you're aware of what's wholesome and what's unwholesome, you're getting rid of what's unwholesome, you're making your relationships harmonious, you're no longer tolerating lacks of love being projected at you, and you're not projecting lacks of love to others. You're helping others. You're shining a light if others are asking for knowledge or, insight from your practice. So you're checking these boxes. Eventually you become harmonious within yourself because of the way you're treating yourself and treating others. Just a natural occurrence. This is why they call it a science. It's provable. You can do this. It's a method that breeds results. So then you have this inner harmony, this inner brightness, this sense of, even though the world might look like it's in chaos and going to hell, there's something in me that's actually still joyful. even though all of that might be going on, or my family might be, angry at me because I'm no longer playing the roles that I did before I started to examine my life. And so I begin to actually feel this deeper joy. And then Patanjali says when this inner harmony becomes really stable and bright, then you can actually turn your insight directly on your ego consciousness, this personality, the self you think you are. That's when the insight becomes refined enough where you can actually begin to examine the I that you call yourself. The mind has to become quiet and clear in order to do this. Then you can start to look at the self-image or self-concept that you've been your whole life. You were given your name at birth. In many ways, you picked up the attitudes and belief systems of your family, your teachers, your culture, what you identified with as cool or not cool growing up. And this has all become stitched and woven together as the story of me. And you begin to look at that, but with this piercing insight of the seer. You're no longer the ego trying to meditate. You're actually that king or queen looking from this seated place of clarity and insight at the image that you've been robotically and dreamily being in the world. It changes everything. Because you realize you're not the body mind. That's the resurrection. That's leaving the tomb of false identification. You're not the body mind. And who you are can never be harmed or hurt or even killed. And as you begin to take your seat in this place of clear seeing, he says your insight gets to the place where it becomes so bright and so clear that you then allow yourself to come to fully rest in the self, capital S. You no longer desire what the ego is or what it offers. And then he says you can, and this is actually Krishna's teaching as well, when you know yourself as the soul, then you can really act in the world. That's what karma yoga is. Oftentimes, this belief that we have to act in a way that's just constantly driving us outside of ourselves, and we're making the problems real, and we're seeing victims and hopelessness, and we're trying to stave back this tide, and it just seems like it's a lost cause, but we're going to do it anyway. When you come to this place of interior illumination, you're no longer deterred by the appearance of things. And you have this piercing insight or wisdom to know where to go, what to do, who to say, what to say, and to whom. You're no longer blind. You see. And this is a very important distinction in the karma yoga of the Bhagavad Gita and just doing things blindly, trying to make a difference as an ego. And so that's the awakened action. And again, it's a process. So in the meanwhile, you still act with compassion, you still try to help others, but you're doing this deep examination at the same time, right? There's a synergy to this, because even though I'm still acting, I'm going to see, okay, well, that didn't go right, or that didn't feel right, or maybe we could do it differently, but I don't know how. I'm going to go in and get still. I'm going to let go of my agenda and my position here. And then I get this download or this clarity of insight, and it's like, that feels right. There's a breeze blowing in that direction. You begin to act in a way that's coming from a depth beyond the ego, right? Very important. So this is a little bit of a comment on what we've been saying regarding purifying or tapas, this purification process. He says, when you want to eliminate a bad habit, the more you want to get rid of it, the more powerful it becomes. When you abandon it in the waking state, it comes in dreams. If it is stopped in dreams, it will express itself in your behavior. Otherwise, it will give rise to disease, right? Physical disease. This particular habit has got to be destroyed at its psychic root, not at the conscious level only. These psychological complexes must be eliminated. For that, a kind of psychic activity, or which will uproot it even from the layers of the subconscious, is required, right? So in A Course in Miracles, Jesus says this is the uprooting of these shallow roots of the personality, right? Because remember, as we begin to do this deeper work, this awakening, we feel these things instinctually. They're not only just our beliefs and the things that we say to ourselves, they're feelings that we have had since we were little children. They're the ways that we have instinctually operated as this personality. And when we begin to see that some of these instincts that we have had are still bringing us in the wrong direction, it could feel hopeless, right? Addictions are a good example of sometimes being overruled by instinct. You say all the right things to yourself, you've read the books, you keep parroting the ideas, you affirm the truth, and yet these instincts can drive you. And so what he's saying here is this deeper work is when you allow this deeper light to show you that you're not the ego and its instincts. This is part of that purification process. And you uproot these shallow roots. And he says another way that this will begin to really take shape and come into fruition is through this deepening of self-examination. He says, when you really begin to study or look at yourself, it includes the entire structure of your personality, the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of your personality. So it will lead in this process of recognizing that you can begin to feel, or he uses the word smell, this out of integrity coming on, or you're about to say something that's going to actually create more conflict in your life. And now, because of this deeper work, you have the ability to stop it, the ability to create space between you and that old habit of reacting. This will come about because you're watching yourself. And as this natural process of watching yourself continues, you're no longer being pulled instantly into these old patterns. Now you're watching them. And if they're coming up, there's going to be increasingly more time to actually say, oh, here it is. I'm not going to go that way anymore. Right? In the beginning, as they say in that little story, you walk down the street, you fall in the hole, you get up, and you go on, right? You fall in the hole again, you're like, why do I keep falling in this hole? And then eventually you go around the hole, right? Because you see the hole is there. That's where we're talking from right now. And then when it really becomes clear, you just choose another street. You're no longer even identified as those reactive personality traits anymore. It's so simple, and it will have, again, these major life-changing attitudes come in. Okay. The other thing that Patanjali is very helpful for us to recognize is he says, again, that this body-mind complex, this personality that we identify as, it's built from the ground up, and the ground in which it's rooted is ignorance, right? Spiritual forgetfulness, right? So remember the experience of being a separate self in all of these traditions is the problem. It doesn't matter if it's, East or West spirituality. The problem is the personality that thinks it's separate is believing a lie, because there is no separation in reality. As we've often said, there's no separation between the waves and the ocean. Your consciousness, but consciousness that has forgotten itself and is ignoring the underlying nature of its oceanic being. And because the ignorance is so fixated on the story of me, it really feels real to be the ego, and only the ego. And so what Patanjali is saying is, from this ground of ignorance sprouts the ego. And from the ego sprout the branches of pleasure and pain. And the ego is driven towards pleasure and wants to avoid pain. And that's its operating system, very simply. It seeks out pleasure and it resists or avoids pain. Now remember something. We had said the first step in purifying yourself is accepting the painful as a temporary provision towards enlightenment. You're going to have to endure looking at your shadow, rewiring some unwholesome behaviors, taking accountability for your unconsciousness, etc. So as the ego, hearing this, the avoidance of pain kicks in. And you're like, nah, not for me. As the ego, this is really what I want. I want pleasure. The beautiful thing about this is even the ego's form of pleasure eventually is going to bring you to pain, because it never really gives you everything you want. And when it does give you pleasure, it's temporary or it's painful in its aftermath. So when you begin to realize, well, yoga is the avoidance of future pain, and all of the pleasure that I've been seeking for at the ego level hasn't brought me this lasting happiness, then maybe I'm ready to endure a little discomfort in order to finally have this unconditional bliss or happiness as my steady state. I want to know myself. I don't want to keep ignoring who I am. I want to wake up to who I am. And Patanjali says the fifth and final product of this body-mind experience that we're having comes from the soil of ignorance. The ego sprouts from the soil of ignoring reality, and then it's driven on by attachment and aversion, pleasure and pain, lust and hatred. These are the two polarities of its operating system. And then the final one is it is afraid of death. It clings to bodily life. All right? And what's really great about this is that you can meditate now, especially most of us, if not all of us here, are past middle-aged. Can't believe it, but it's true. Death is inevitable for this body. And we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about death. Like, what a great meditation to know that you're not going to be this body. And to think that in the rear view mirror, that's much more of what life was like as the body than what's going on forward as you move along. Like the end is coming, right? So who are you if you're not the body? And what you're going to confront is the ego instinct of clinging to bodily life and really fearing death. That's part of the operating system of the separate self. And with yoga, with this ability to look and not react, you can allow these instincts to come up. Breathe. And really see, okay, well, if this body dies, I've actually uncovered something in me, this seer, this witness, that is not the body. It's watching the body. And I'm more attuned now to being this light. And as we've said, as your consciousness becomes increasingly more subtle, God's grace comes in. And there's that place in you where God's grace in your subtle and intellect or insight, merge. That's yoga. When your bright intellect, this intuitive mind, that's not analytical or rational, but it's intuitive and feeling, and it can see through the things of nature and phenomena. That part of you that's bright and clear will merge with the grace field of God's presence here and now. And when that happens, you'll realize, I am not the body. That's why Sri Nisargadatta, I was just reading today in I Am That, he was talking about a story of his guru's guru, and because he was being asked, aren't you afraid of death? And he's just like, I've already died. I'm doubly dead. I've died in my mind, and I've already died as the body. I'm awake. I know. And that fact can't be refuted from the ego personality level. You know, you're the ocean. And he tells a story of his guru, or his guru's guru, clapping and celebrating one night with all the bhajans, the sacred songs. And then the next moment he's done. And Sri Nisargadatta said, just like a candle going out, he was done, clapping and celebrating, and then gone. Had no fear, knew what was going to happen, according to Sri Nisargadatta, but was just ready. Are you ready? Are you clinging to bodily life? Right? This is what we examine in this practice. There's no right or wrong answer. There's your examination of your experience. That's what makes this such a beautiful teaching. This is the depth psychology, where you get to know yourself. You're not a bad girl or a good girl if you're clinging or not clinging to bodily life. It has nothing to do with that, with these outside judges and evaluators and, you're breaking the rules. None of that. You're looking so that you can undo anything that hurts and feel the bliss at the center of your being. How lovely. What a wonderful opportunity that is. So these 5 things that I've mentioned, the ground, which is ignorance, right? Forgetting of yourself, ignoring or denying God. The ego is the self that rises in place of your real self, and then it's driven on by lust and fear, or attack and clinging, or attachment and aversion, all of these different ways of describing those 2 polarities, and then clinging to the body. Patanjali calls these 5 aspects of the separated state in Sanskrit kleshas. These are the 5 kleshas, and the word klesha means tormentor. And I think he nails it when he says that. When you're ignoring or denying yourself, you're tormented. You might not know why. As Sri Nisargadatta says, we actually seek for pleasure because we're in pain. Pain is the ubiquitous default setting of nature. And pleasure is really these temporary interruptions in pain. Those pleasures will die down and you'll go back to the default state of being tormented. Why are we being tormented? Because we're ignoring reality. And when we really double and triple and quadruple down or Google down into ignoring reality, we're projecting from this confused, agitated, angry, upset, fearful, victimhood mind. And that's why we see the world the way it is. The world looks the way it does because of this fundamental denial of God as ourself. So the only solution, as Sri Nisargadatta would say, is you got to wake up from this dream. You won't be tormented anymore, and you won't be driven to entertain yourself as much or to try to get out of pain as much, because you'll actually come back to this place where just as you are, it's bliss. I need do nothing. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to be somebody. I don't have to say yes to go to that party because of what they're going to think of me if I don't go. I'm free of that stuff. Doesn't that feel good? Haven't there been parties you didn't want to go to? Right? Or gatherings or situations that you just felt like, oh, I'm obligated to do. What if you weren't obligated? What if you could actually say no and be comfortable with that? Right? We're a slave to these attachments and these codependent dynamics that we have as the separate self. They torment us in so many different ways. And when you're looking and paying attention and have insight, you'll pick them up constantly. But the beauty of this practice is the medicine is right there. Yes, you're going to see the dis-ease or the upset or the disquiet or where you're creating future pain, but you're also, now I know why, and I won't do that anymore. Right? Really helpful. Okay, so do you want a story? Yes, a little story. All right. Well, the story that I had picked out for tonight is taken from the end of the Mahabharata. This is India's great epic. This is an abridged version. It's 10 volumes. I have that. Yes. The story comes at the end of this epic tale, and it's really the story of these 5 brothers. And the 5 brothers are great leaders and kings. And this one brother, Yudhishthira, he's the emperor of the world. And the long story short is his cousin was a psychopath and tried to steal the kingdom from him. And they had this world war. That's where the Bhagavad Gita takes place. The Bhagavad Gita is the 18th chapter in the Mahabharata. So it's just a sliver of this epic tale. So, long story short, as I said, Yudhishthira and his brothers, along with the army that gathered with him, including Krishna as the chariot driver, defeats the powers of ignorance and, evil and hatred, right? The darkness. So the kingdom's now been placed in good hands, and they get the final cue to complete their earth journey. Now, in Vedic culture, I've mentioned this before, you have these 4 stages of life. There is this sense of wanting to enjoy, so that's kama, right? So you enjoy life. This is where we have the Kama Sutra, right? That book with all the dirty pictures. Well, kama doesn't just mean sexual union. It means pleasure and enjoyment. So in Vedic society, yes, pleasure is very important. It's a part of life. Don't take the nectar out of your life. Enjoy. But now watch. Then there's acquiring of wealth, artha, stabilize for your family, make sure you've provided, you're comfortable, you're taken care of. And then you have this way of keeping with the deeper principles of life, things that we've been talking about tonight. Dharma. You realize that there's a deeper structure to reality. There's a unity behind the diversity. There's a divinity behind the appearances. There's an eternal state behind the time that you're seeing. That's dharma. You're becoming sensitive to that. Now where these 5 brothers are and their wife, they're at the state where all of that is now complete. And the 5th and final state is moksha, liberation, or the 4th state rather, is moksha, liberation. So now it's symbolized as they're going on this trek up to the top of the Himalayas. Okay? They set out from their village, everybody's fanfare, waving them on, they're going to liberate. And as they're leaving the village, the villagers can't come along on this journey. Remember, this is all symbolic of your psyche. Villagers can't come along on this journey, but a dog is following them out of the village. Right, Lee, you're going to like this one. So a dog follows them out of the village, and they're going on their way. And as they're making their way across these vast, empty wastelands of sand and forest, they're moving through. It says that now they begin to, one by one, die. So the first one to die is Draupadi, the wife. It's a long story, I can't get into it, but it was one wife for 5 brothers. Okay? She dies. And Bhima, who's the brother who's super strong, like rips trees out of the ground, and hits people with the trees, can tear people apart, and just super strong guy. So he asks his brother Yudhisthira, who is actually the embodiment of Dharma. He's the purest one. He's so honest. He's so righteous that he's the one that always has the wisdom. He's the emperor. So Bhima asks Yudhisthira, why did Draupadi lose her yoga? Why did she die? And Yudhisthira says to Bhima, because out of the 5 husbands, she favored Arjuna. Special love. Special love. She saw love as something to belong to one more than another. So she drops dead. And Yudhisthira is said to look at her drop dead, and one pointedly continues on. His mind doesn't shake. The next is the 2 twin brothers. They drop dead. One drops dead because he had pride. Let's see if I'm right about that. So Sahadev falls, and he thought no one equaled him for wisdom. It is for that fault that he has fallen. And then his twin brother, Nakula, dies, and it's because Nakula was such a heartthrob, and he thought he was the most beautiful. Right? So you're seeing these places of darkness still within the personality, and they can't make it to the top of self-realization. So they're losing their connection to the journey of yoga because of where they had their center of gravity. Special love, I was smarter than everybody else, I was more beautiful than everybody else, right? These ego belief systems. And then Arjuna falls because of pride. And then finally, Bhima himself, the one that's been asking these questions, why are they falling? What happened to them? He finally is being told by Yudhisthira, his righteous brother, that it's because of gluttony and your attachment to your own power that you can't make it up the mountain. Okay, so now it's just Yudhisthira and the dog. The dog is still there. So now, Yudhisthira makes it to the very top of the Himalayas. Right, this is like Mount Everest we're talking about. That's where Mount Everest is, in the Himalayas. And like this stargate opens at the top of the mountain. And out of the stargate comes Indra, this great god, right? The god of the Vedas. And he's on his glorious chariot or UFO, whatever way you want to look at it. And this thunderous sound happens, and the stargate opens, and here's the glorious Indra coming through the gate to take Yudhisthira to the other world. And Yudhisthira is now being told to leave the dog behind. And the dog's in the middle of this terrible wind-blowing snow, right? You know, leave the dog can't come. Get in my chariot and let's go. You're going to the highest heavens. You'll see your family there. They're all there. They just couldn't make the journey complete in this earth life. So Yudhisthira says, I can't leave the dog. He says, it is universally agreed that there can be neither friendship nor enmity with the mortal dead, nor was there anything I can do to revive my brothers and my wife. That is why I abandoned them, something I never did while they lived. Surrendering to his enemies, someone seeks refuge. Right? Surrendering to his enemies, someone seeking refuge, I will never betray. Killing a woman, I will never do that. Robbing a holy person, harming a friend, these four, and abandoning one who is devoted to me. I can never do that. That's the dog. This dog has been devoted to me since we left the village. He's gone on this really long, brutal journey with us. I will not abandon him. And when Indra heard that, he had Yudhisthira look at the dog, and the dog transformed into the god of Dharma. It was the god of Dharma the whole time. Dharma is the right way of being in alignment with reality. And then Dharma, the god, blesses Yudhisthira and says, you have now entered the state of immortality. And like Jesus in this story, you could actually take your body with you. Your body is divinized. Your other family members couldn't divinize the very cellular makeup of the self that you thought of as the body. But now you're able to take your body to heaven, and you don't need a chariot, right? Your very light field is the chariot. You've completed, right? So this is the path of yoga, all right? I think that's all I have for today. So maybe we could just sit for a couple of minutes and digest. As you bring your hands to heart, in your most subtle awareness, get a clear sense of your I am as this witness, this seer, the one listening right now. This is where the I am sits as the deepest subject that is perceiving this moment and hearing these words. Where we get lost is when we take this I am and say, I am this or I am that. So let's remove this and that. And in this instant, just be the I am. And as we have learned in these sacred teachings, the I am that is sitting as the witness is the one I am, appearing in a multitude of forms. And so we recognize our shared unity, this unbreakable oneness, and the true self as we say namaste. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining on Facebook, you have the link there below in the comments section to donate to the 5 p.m. service, which the church and I greatly appreciate. You've just subtilized your consciousness even more from that good deed. Thank you. All right, my friends, let's stand and seal the deal. We can bless the offering from afar. May it be used to bring peace, joy, and truth to all minds in whatever form it may transform. And as we rest in this moment, we recognize that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is.